Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. I hope everyone is having an amazing morning or afternoon or evening whenever you're finding this video. Today, we are going to take a break on our series because one of my favorite creators, which is Unapologetically Me True Crime, has come out with another video. She doesn't post that much, and when she does, they're usually very good. And I have watched a little bit of this one, and I'm telling you, this is one you will want to watch to the end. Also, because at the end, I actually put in another clip of a video that shows Nichole's GPS from the morning of the murder, shows her actual phone ping and where she exactly was and why it doesn't line up with any other day that she went to work. It shows her going to work and going home every day except for this one morning, which is really crazy that the police just overlooked that. But let's get into this video, guys. If you're a returning subscriber or a member, thank you. For my new members, I love you guys, and I appreciate all the love and support you guys show my channel. And if you are new here, please stick around and take a chance and consider subscribing. We have an awesome community and would love to have you. But stick through this video to the end if you have not seen it. It's a good one. All right, guys, let's get it. Okay, so this is take two because I just actually recorded this whole video and accidentally did it on mute. So here we go.
Let's get into this video. So, contrary to the belief of many people who hate on those of us still looking into this case, there was a decent amount of evidence that was not tested and or not fully tested in the Watts case. Now, this is a fact that is documented in the discovery, as well as being confirmed by investigators who worked on this case. We have heard Tammy Lee say it.
We were preparing for a murder trial, and a murder trial that was going to last years. And all of a sudden, I receive a phone call from Detective Baumover, and he said, "Hey, Chris is going to plead guilty to all charges." Whoa, wait, like, we're not done. We have all these things to do. We didn't examine all the evidence. We didn't interview every witness we needed to. We didn't do all of these things that you would do in a normal investigation because he stopped the clock.
We have heard Steve Wren say it. Michael Prill made several mentions of it in his report, and everything that wasn't tested was actually listed in discovery as such, meaning within the discovery, there is a list of unprocessed evidence. So you can argue in the comment section that if there was evidence of Nikki being involved, then they would have arrested her all you want. The issue is nobody knows if there is evidence of Nichol Kessinger being involved. They didn't even have enough forensic evidence to convict Chris Watts without his confession.
And Detective Michael Prill wanted to pursue, even after the plea, Nichol Kessinger and look into her further, but was shut down.
The DA all but admitted to that. Chris Watts wanted to plea out in August, right away. He wanted to just be done with it. The DA was waiting for evidence so that he could convict Chris Watts beyond a reasonable doubt. DA Rourke initially didn't want to plea Chris Watts out. Chris Watts' next court appearance was scheduled for November 19th. Even Nichol Kessinger knew about this court date. Chris Watts signed the plea agreement on November 6th. The DA said all this hubbub about the death penalty being taken off the table in exchange for his guilty plea, right? But Chris Watts would have never been executed in Colorado. And what do you know? Now they don't even have the death penalty in Colorado anymore. Which means at the time Chris Watts was arrested for this crime, Colorado was already in the process of getting rid of the death penalty. And we talked a bit about this before. Also, Chris Watts said he didn't care if he got the death penalty. Sandy Rusick didn't want the death penalty. She didn't want any more death.
Would you have preferred the death penalty in this case? And if so, why did you not pursue it?
Christopher Watts certainly deserved the death penalty. We thought long and hard about it. We had a lot of discussions within our office, and what compelled me to accept the defense's offer was meeting with those folks in North Carolina. When Steve and I sat in their kitchen and we explained to their family the state of the death penalty in Colorado, the possible future of the death penalty as we knew that an election was coming up, and the likelihood that an execution would occur anytime within any of our lifetimes, not being a high probability. And when I brought up the offer that had been extended to us by the defense, and when Sandy leaned across the table and looked at me very sternly and said, "And why haven't you done that yet?" that helped solidify in my mind that this family needed some closure. We were able to get that for them this morning.
Note that Chris is the one that came and said to his defense, when they didn't even have all the information. They did not have the whole full discovery. They did not have evidence that they asked for yet. And Chris is the one that came and said, no, I want to plead guilty to all charges.
Chris Watts wasn't going to ever see execution, even if he was sentenced to death. Period. The families knew it, the courts knew it, the whole state of Colorado knew it, and most importantly, DA Michael Rourke knew it. So, why the plea deal? Laziness, indifference, or something more sinister? In this video, I'm going to go through all of the evidence that was never fully tested before or because of the plea deal in the Watts family annihilation case. Some of the evidence we have talked about before, but a majority of this evidence gets overlooked far too often. When you think about criminal investigations where a homicide occurred, there's evidence that you immediately look for, even as a quote-unquote armchair detective, right? Well, some of this go-to evidence wasn't even tested. It was gathered and placed into evidence, but it was never processed. We're talking fingerprints not belonging to Chris Watts or anyone in the Watts immediate family. There's a footprint, there's a blue latex glove, and Chris Watts' truck interior. You know, where he said he took the lives of his 2 little girls and traveled with his deceased wife inside on the floorboards for over an hour. I've listed 7 different areas of evidentiary testing that was either never done or was left incomplete, all due to the plea deal. Let's get into number 1. Full DNA testing inside the Watts home. Yes, there was testing done within the Watts home, but it was only targeted DNA that was taken, such as on the sheet that was found in the kitchen trash can. A full swab and lift of carpet, walls, stairs, linens, door frames, and even Chris Watts' vehicle interior was not completed because once Chris Watts confessed and agreed to the plea deal, it became unnecessary for court. Number 2, trace blood testing, which means the luminol or blue star testing. Despite rumors and those haters we talked about earlier, the Watts home was not luminol tested top to bottom. Only certain high probability spots were tested. Number 3, a complete digital extraction of Shanann Watts' iPhone. They extracted some calls, text, and got a basic timeline, but deep level forensics were not finished. This includes background app logs, health data timing, step data correlation, Bluetooth device pairing, and this is why some timeline questions remain, like exact wake times, movements, etc. Number 4, Apple Watch and iPhone pairing events. And this is one of the most confusing and aggravating parts of this case, because they collected the data, but they did not fully analyze it before the plea. Questions that remain untested include exactly what time the watch connected, whether it connected via the Lexus or the house, whether movement detected was Shanann's or Chris's, whether the watch was moved or picked up.
That is a huge problem because that right there would have told us exactly what happened pretty much with Shanann, when exactly it happened.
A trial would have forced a detailed digital forensic analysis. The plea ended that line of investigation, and it ended it early. Number 5, GPS and truck telemetry gaps. Now, they confirmed general movement and location of Chris Watts' APC work truck, but some timestamps were still being reconstructed. Additional truck ECU data was pending, that ECU data being like the brain of the vehicle, the black box, and also the angle of loading algorithms used in body placement reconstruction. were not fully run. And we're talking when Chris Watts said he loaded his family into that truck, they can test for that by doing body reconstruction. The weight would have showed up on the truck's black box. So none of that was fully run. So they hadn't even yet proved that what he confessed to was true. And the reason is quite simple. These analyses take weeks to months, and the plea stopped them mid-process. Number 6, additional forensics at Survey 319. Only what was needed to locate the bodies had been completed. They did not fully sift all soil and sand for evidence. They hadn't run full sweeping DNA on the tank openings. They hadn't collected all microfibers present, and they hadn't searched wider perimeter zones, like the road coming in. And again, I say this is normal when a defendant confesses and no trial is needed. So I'm not saying that it was abnormal for him to take a plea. And I'm not saying it was abnormal for them not to go ahead and process this evidence. What I'm saying is the plea stopped the process of the evidence. Yet why? Why was the plea even a thing?
Also, I do think that it was an injustice to not keep following the evidence, because all they had was his statement to go on, which didn't even make sense because he said one thing and then just pled guilty. All he said was Shanann did it the whole entire time up until the time that he pled guilty. For what reason, I don't know. I don't even know why he took the polygraph. I don't know. I know he's sitting where he needs to be, but there's a much, much bigger picture, and you've got to watch this whole video if you have not seen it, because me and this girl, we think a lot alike.
All they did for him was take the death penalty off the table, and he wasn't even going to get the death penalty. Like, even had he been convicted to death, he wouldn't have died. They would not have executed him. So why this plea deal, and why so damn fast? I'm sorry, this is just irritating. It really is. And for anybody who doesn't see this, I have to question, like, how familiar are you with crime investigations? How familiar are you with the legal system? And yet you can't see that so much evidence just went unseen and a plea deal was reached super fast. All right, I'm gonna keep going because I'll go off on a tangent and just bitch the whole time. All right, number 7, secondary autopsy and histology testing. The autopsies were thorough, but some optional tests weren't done, including electron microscopy for bruising age. So we have bruising and we don't know when that bruising took place. They can tell things like this. Extended toxicology panels, certain tissue histology for pressure injury and timing of the injury. These are tests that are typically reserved for cases where the cause, timing, or manner of death will be challenged in court, which I can guarantee if there was going to be a trial, this would have all been done. And you know how I know that? Because I'm going to challenge it. Yeah. Stick around for that one. Little old Ivy is going to challenge the coroner's report. A few other things that had not yet been gathered, let alone even gone through, was the digital information that Detective Michael Prill had written down in his reports. The files he was going to ask the judge for warrants for. I don't know if you remember, but Detective Michael Prill turned in his report on October 31st, Halloween of 2018. And then we have Chris Watts signing the plea deal on November 6th.
This makes me wonder if Chris got knowledge to the fact that this detective was wanting to look into Nichol Kessinger, and he really wanted to look into her, like really. And it makes me wonder if Chris knew this, and that's why he decided just to take the plea deal, to cover up for her, or the bigger picture. I believe it's a lot bigger than just Nichol Kessinger.
So not even a full week went by, and I find that extremely suspicious. Michael Prill was requesting so much more information to be gathered from Nichol Kessinger's devices. He wanted to know where she was. He wanted the Vivint footage, the cameras inside the house. He wanted all of that. He was going to go get warrants for that, and they had all of that. So the plea deal came before any of that could even be looked at. And I have to ask why. And we can't forget the DA's own words. He said that the most compelling thing they had as proof of Chris Watts committing this crime alone was Chris Watts' own statement.
Now, interestingly enough, the district attorney says that his statement was probably the strongest piece of evidence that they had, because they said that what his story was, that Shanann killed the girls and then he killed his wife in a rage, there was absolutely no evidence of that.
And what he meant by that was his confession, because there was no physical evidence linking Chris Watts to these crimes other than his own statement. So again, when we're wondering why they didn't finish the testing, the answer is simple. It's because the plea deal froze the investigation, exactly as Tammy Lee said, which in turn froze any further investigation of Nichol Kessinger and or anyone else. All those warrants Detective Prill was going to be going after would never get a chance to even be asked for. Once Chris Watts agreed to plead guilty, there would be no trial, and therefore no need to prove anything to a jury, no need to strengthen or clarify the timeline, no need to complete expensive forensic testing. Dare I quote DA Michael Rourke one more time, quote, "The evidence was already overwhelming. We didn't need every single test completed," unquote.
That's a complete injustice to Shanann, Bella, Cece, and baby Nico. They deserved all of the evidence to be looked at very thoroughly.
Which is completely opposite of what he said after the plea was signed, when he spoke to Denver 7.
Those are the questions that will always haunt anyone who was involved in the investigation, and I don't think that there is ever going to be a satisfactory answer for anyone, not the least of which is the Rusick family. I don't have any information about any pre-planning or anything like that. Obviously, something like this in my mind doesn't just happen on the spur of the moment. Go ahead, Carol.
There's a lot made about who and the Hamilton that they were smothered. Did that ever come into play? DNA on their neck?
No, it didn't.
There you go, out of his own mouth. Ugh, I can't stand this guy. Didn't even do what they were supposed to do with the little girls. Didn't even find DNA or look for it on their necks. It's just, this guy makes me so sick.
Yeah.
What was odd or striking to me was, I think if somebody came up and put their hands around somebody's neck, the first thing a victim's going to do is grab onto the hands or the arms and try to pull them away, or scrape or claw or bite or whatever, to try and get that person's hands off of their throat. There wasn't anything like that in Shanann.
We had him photographed from head to toe that night, and nothing was observed that would be consistent with injuries to him as a result of a struggle.
What does this mean? It means that there are unanswered questions, not because evidence wasn't there, but because investigators didn't need to finalize every single detail once the plea was accepted. So we have fuzzy timeline debates on the Apple Watch, incomplete scene reconstructions, and less than transparent autopsy details, leaving a lot of room for interpretation, which is likely why the DA fought so hard to seal the autopsy reports and medical reports. A trial would have brought out all of that, but the plea shut it down. Let's finish up this video talking about the latent prints that were not tested or followed up on more aggressively. Let's play one of my favorite games to play with DA Michael Rourke. It's called Devil's Advocate. Fitting, right? I know, he hates me. I'm sure if he knows of me, he hates me. Anyway, playing Devil's Advocate, there are several factors that could explain why these latent prints were not fully processed or tested. The most obvious is the hyper-focus on Chris Watts as the sole perpetrator. Chris Watts' confession to the murders, combined with Occam's razor and the limited yet obvious evidence pointing directly to him, meant that law enforcement focus was largely on him as the primary and sole perpetrator. And what I mean by that is, he was the husband and father of the victims. He had a mistress. They had financial issues. He was the last person to see all of the victims alive, all of which he admitted to. He would have been the prime suspect no matter what. And then, once Chris admitted to killing Shanann, there may have been a decision to prioritize his involvement over investigating any other leads or prints, particularly since Chris's confession seemed conclusive. Now, I say may have been, but we all know that's exactly what happened. However, even the DA said there was no forensic evidence of what Chris Watts said happened that morning, which has me questioning the real why behind the decision to prioritize Chris Watts as a sole perpetrator and not treat his mistress, whose digital footprint places her near the scene of the crime on the morning of the crime, as a person of interest.
Exactly. And at the end of this video, I'm going to show you a clip of her GPS data if you haven't already seen it.
And you can say what you want about that phone ping and that it could be on her way to work and all of these things, but there are only 3, maybe 4 times that she pinged in Frederick, Colorado, and all of those times she put herself in Frederick, Colorado. So why would the 6:16 a.m. ping on the morning of August 13, 2018 be any different? Every time she pinged in Frederick, she admitted she was in Frederick for some reason or another. So what's with this? She also never clocked into work that morning. I don't know. Every time she pinged in Frederick, she admitted she was in Frederick for some reason or another. So what's with this?
And she called her good friend Jim.
She also never clocked into work that morning. I don't know where rumors came that she did, that she clocked into work at 6:54. Somebody commented that she clocked into work at like 6:54 a.m., which means she couldn't have done anything. Hello.
Are you slow?
The murders were committed before 5 a.m., allegedly. So even if she did, which we have no evidence of her clocking in, and even if it was at 6:54 a.m., wherever that time came from, that does not mean that she couldn't have committed this crime. Chris Watts left his driveway at 5:30 a.m., around 5:30 a.m., and drove out to Survey. She pinged in Frederick at 6:16 a.m. She pinged in Frederick after he had already left. Do you see what I mean? So it doesn't really matter if she did show up to work at 6:54 a.m. She still was there during the whole thing going on, or could have been, allegedly, right? Okay.
Right.
Where am I?
For sure, right.
Oh, yes, playing devil's advocate. So the second factor could be limited resources and time constraints. Testing latent prints and running them through databases takes time and it takes resources. Real-life evidence testing is nowhere near as fast as they make it look on TV. We all should know that by now. They have to make it look that fast or else the episode would go on forever while they're waiting for results, and people would never find out the conclusion because they'd get too bored of watching them wait. So the point of TV crime dramas is to have the conclusion of the case within the episode covering the case. It's a drama. It's supposed to build up and then give you a conclusion from start to finish in an hour. In real life, it can take several months to get back these types of results. It can take several months for the complete toxicology to even come back. I
don't care how long it takes. The girls deserved it. Shanann deserved it. Her baby, her unborn baby boy deserved it.
A victim. High priority cases can be fast-tracked and there are always strings that can be pulled, but usually the process doesn't happen quickly, especially if there are complexities to the specimen. When talking specifically about latent fingerprints, it depends on what they were lifted off of, whether it's a full or a partial print, and then the number of comparisons that they are comparing it to. And then there's the backlogs, which are a real thing. Large backlogs can delay results for an extra 9 months or more. Once law enforcement seemed to have Chris's confession, they may have considered the case resolved, leaving the latent prints as secondary or non-critical evidence. With the plea deal signed and the focus entirely on Chris Watts, it's not only possible, but likely that some evidence fell through the cracks, including the testing of prints that didn't immediately match Chris Watts. Then we have the potential dismissal of latent prints as being unrelated. Law enforcement might have dismissed the prints as unrelated or as having been left by people who had normal access to the house, such as family members, or as accidental prints from past interactions that didn't have any connection to the crime itself. I mean, we know Nicole Atkinson and her son Nicholas were traipsing through that entire home, touching everything, looking through everything, trying to find Shanann. Even Nicole Atkinson's little girl was playing in the playroom, which everybody thought was a ghost, which is like, oh my God, people still believe that to this day. No, that was Nicole Atkinson's daughter. But anyway, the more I have dug into the potential suspects in this case outside of Nichol Kessinger. Just thinking about this makes me cringe, because the latent prints could be a potential lead that was simply never explored. If new testing were done, or if someone came forward with information, these prints might very well reveal an unknown individual who was connected to the crime in some way. And people may say, well, Nichol Kessinger's prints would not be strange to be found in the house because she admittedly was there. She told investigators that she had been there on a couple occasions. So her prints being found there wouldn't necessarily mean anything. But her prints on certain items might. And when we're talking about other people being brought in, some other people that I have brought to your attention in part 4, they would have no reason to have prints there, right? So some of these possibilities include an accomplice or witness. If the prints belong to someone unfamiliar with the family or Chris Watts, it could indicate that someone else was involved with the crime, whether before or after the murders. This could provide insight into whether Chris had help or if someone else was a witness to the events that took place on August 13th, 2018. Another possibility could be another person who entered the house after the murders. Perhaps a person connected to Chris Watts or the family to help him clean up or cover his tracks. This is also undoubtedly, in my opinion, a potential clue in the investigation of Nichol Kessinger's role.
There was also a bag supposedly found on one of the dining room chairs, a brown bag that did not belong to Shanann. I don't know whatever happened with that. They ever even tried to find out whose this bag was, but that should have been looked into as well.
If new tests were done and Nichol Kessinger's prints were found to match those latent prints, it could reignite the theory that she may have been more involved than previously thought, perhaps helping with evidence destruction, or at the very least knowing far more than she admitted about Chris Watts' plans. Were any of her prints found on items that might be significant, such as items that were linked to the disposal of the bodies or near the bodies? What about Chris's APC work truck? She never said she was there, yet they found a lighter on the passenger side, and all these things weren't tested. What about on the bodies themselves? If you remember, Chris Watts' defense team spoke with another forensic medical examiner who told them that despite the girls being disposed of in crude oil for some time, it was still possible to get fingerprints or DNA from them. If you also remember, the CBI told Chris Watts that this might be possible. In fact, I believe they told Chris Watts they would certainly be able to do this and asked him if they would find his prints on their necks, and he adamantly said no, over and over again.
Show you a little bit of what we're working with, some evidence and facts that we know, and then we kind of get our way to the truth. So, the truth. Okay. Everything I've told you. Truth. So what's going to happen when their cause of death comes back to you for the girls? It's not going to. Okay. Are you sure? I'm 100% positive it's not going to come back to me. Who's it going to come back to? Shanann was on top of Cece. Okay. What do you want me to say? I just want the truth. That is the truth. And then what about Bella? Bella was laid out, sprawled on her bed. Okay. And I saw Shanann on top of Cece, so I ran in there. Okay. And what happens when a coroner looks and says, Cece, your fingerprints on her neck? It's not going to be my fingerprints. Okay. What is it going to be? It's going to be Shanann's. Are you sure? Well, we don't know about Bella, right? We don't know about Bella. Bella, it's just, I didn't see Shanann on top of her. Okay. That's the commotion I heard upstairs. Yeah, I'm assuming. Okay.
They even brought up the size of his hands, that they would be able to tell whether it was a man's hands or a woman's hands. And this was also because Chris Watts said they were strangled. It wasn't until after the DA read for the court his theory of smothering that Chris Watts understood that the girls were not strangled.
Your Honor, understand very clearly, Bella fought back for her life. The frenulum, the connective tissue between her upper lip and her gum, had a 1.5 centimeter laceration. She bit her tongue multiple times. before she died. She fought back for her life as her father smothered her. Celeste had no such injuries.
You can see the moment the DA reads out how the girls were killed. It's as if he didn't know until then that they were smothered and that Bella had that damage inside of her mouth.
And also remember that he said that the only reason that it came back as smothering as a cause of death was because he had previously tried to smother them in the home. So I don't even think at this point that smothering had ever come out of his mouth.
That's just my opinion, but that's what it looks like to me. The swabbings of the girls' necks were not processed. So we don't even know if there was any DNA lifted at all.
There's a lot made about DNA on the people's necks. Now that we know they were smothered. Did that ever come into play? DNA on their necks?
No, it didn't. Yeah. Sorry, I meant, yeah, we'll go back behind first.
The other latent prints listed in discovery were also left unprocessed. Latent prints that didn't match anyone in the family or Chris Watts. Now this presents a huge unanswered question in the Watts case. Their testing was delayed and or not fully pursued, which raises the possibilities that prints could have been from someone else who had a connection to the crime scene, or scenes, I should say. Whether these prints belong to Nichol Kessinger, another individual, or someone else who entered the scene after the murders, they remain an important piece of evidence that deserves further attention. Do you agree?
Yes.
There has always been the issue of lack of hard evidence in this case. It's the elephant in the room of any and every conversation, post, and video. No matter what theory you believe, there are certain things that remain the same, and one of those things is the plea deal froze the investigation. There is also the consistent lack of motive that fits the evidence that was presented. Is it possible that tunnel vision played the main role here? In my opinion, yes. Does that mean it was done maliciously? No. That's an entirely different argument. There really is no arguing tunnel vision in this case, but that's just my opinion. One thing that is for sure is that there is no quote-unquote smoking gun to prove that Chris Watts killed the girls. You also have to remember that the statement they went with was the one where Chris Watts said he took Shanann's life after she took the girls' lives. He initially said that he witnessed Shanann Watts strangling Cece on the baby monitor. He said he then ran into Cece's room and pulled Shanann off of Cece from behind, and then, quote, did the same thing to her, unquote, her being Shanann, i.e., he strangled Shanann. The words strangled, smothered, and choked were all used interchangeably by Ronnie and law enforcement, but Chris Watts stuck with strangled. He changed his story, but that was months later after the DA charged him with smothering the girls to death and produced an entire narrative of what he and the medical examiner believed happened to the girls. But we don't really know for sure whether or not the girls were strangled or smothered. Cece had no indications of either. And Bella had those injuries that were consistent with smothering, but to what extent? Those injuries could have also been caused by someone holding her mouth to keep her quiet. Why didn't Cece fight back? Was she asleep? Was she drugged? This has never been made clear.
You know, I've always honestly wondered the same thing because I just don't understand how one of the girls had oil in her lungs or stomach, and just it doesn't make any sense. None of this makes any sense. So I always wondered if maybe it was like chloroform, maybe, or if they were drugged in some kind of way. Because, yes, why didn't Cece have any kind of defense wounds? She wouldn't just sit there. I mean, she was 3 years old, but it just doesn't make any sense.
Another thing that was very strange about this plea deal, in my opinion, is the lack of transparency. Yep. Typically, as part of a guilty plea deal, the perpetrator is made to tell exactly what happened and why. There are good reasons why this is usually the case, but we didn't get that.
How and why? I don't think he will give an honest assessment of why he did what he did, how he did what he did. I intentionally called upon him to see if he would answer those questions in the courtroom this morning. Those are the questions that will always haunt anyone who was involved in the investigation, and I don't think that there is ever going to be a satisfactory answer for anyone, not the least of which is the Rusick family.
He didn't even try. He just let somebody go to jail for life without even knowing the full picture. How is that justice at all?
There was no narrative given by Chris Watts that made any sense, only the theory that was read aloud by DA Michael Rourke in court during Chris Watts' sentencing. I'm going to read you a quote from one of Chris's interviews. This is in Discovery. It says, quote, "I asked Chris if he was sure they would have hand marks and that they weren't smothered. And he said they shouldn't have been smothered. No. And Bella, I don't know. But Cece, she, being Shanann, was on top of her being Cece, and her, being Cece's, head was to the side. I asked Chris if he saw Shanann using a pillow on top of Cece, and he said no," unquote. We need to remember the people performing the autopsy work for the department that's prosecuting the case and may imply that something is certain when in fact it is not certain. It is based on cognitive biases. It's based on opinion. It's based on their experience. All evidence obtained from cell phone records, searches, etc. shows no evidence of premeditation of murder. Does it show evidence of marital issues? Yes. Evidence of cheating? Yes. Evidence that Chris Watts was considering leaving Shanann? Yes. But that is not evidence of premeditation.
Do you know the orders of the death?
No, like I talked about earlier, we just weren't able to ascertain time of death as to any of these individuals. So to say that Shanann was deceased before the girls or vice versa would simply be speculation.
In fact, this all supports Chris Watts' story just as much, if not more so, than investigators' narrative that he was planning this murder. Now, I'm still on the fence of whether or not it was planned, whether or not it was spontaneous. I think it was planned, but I don't think it was planned very far ahead. I think it might have been an idea that maybe was hypothetical, and at some point it switched from hypothetical to this is happening. And
my theory on this is that the idea was there, and they talked about it that night at the Lazy Dog, and the whole thing, whether Chris was backing out, she had to talk him into it, whatever, they talked about it on that 111-minute call that they both can't remember. I mean, they can remember every other conversation they had, and they can remember text, but they can't remember what they talked about for 111 minutes. That's a pretty long phone call. And then this happens. So that is my opinion, that all this happened and was thought of and told to Chris, and he was given directions, in my opinion, that weekend.
And I'm not sure which one of them yet was the one to kind of pull the trigger on that. But evidence from Shanann Watts' phone records, searches, all of that stuff clearly show that Shanann had strong emotions concerning her husband and her marriage. She talked about Chris not wanting the baby, Chris being distant, suspicions that he was cheating and going to leave her. But this is not evidence that Shanann killed anyone, just as the digital findings are not evidence Chris Watts killed anyone. Also, if we're talking Chris Watts' psychological indicators, study after study has shown that trying to use a person's emotions as an indicator of guilt is incredibly unreliable. Appearing unemotional at some times and overly emotional at other times is not an indicator of guilt. From what I have seen, investigators made very little effort in attempting to verify certain aspects of Chris Watts' story.
Yeah.
What do you make of the discrepancy between the story he told about strangling or seeing Shanann strangle the children versus the fact that he actually smothered them? What do you make of that? It seems like a small discrepancy.
Oh no, that's a very large discrepancy. That is another lie. And when he sat there and in that interview demonstrated what he saw her doing, and we know that that's not what happened, it turned into a very large discrepancy in our mind.
Do we know what he used to smother the girls?
No. Beyond his hand, I don't know if there was anything in his hand. What I can tell you is that during the course of the autopsies, there was no fibers or anything like that found in their airways to indicate pillow or blanket or anything like that, so I don't know.
Despite the fact that he had zero history of abuse or violence of any kind.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was curious if during your investigation, if you guys found any evidence, anything suggesting that he'd have violent tendencies?
No.
Any mental problems or even low intelligence?
No, none of the above. Yeah.
You see this a lot in unjust convictions. Due to strong initial evidence, investigators and prosecution focus on one person and they don't investigate any other leads. They did not verify DNA on the children. Swabs were taken, but there is no mention of it being tested. If there were fingerprints of any kind on the bodies left after the oil, they weren't mentioned in autopsy. There's no mention of DNA tests to Shanann Watts' fingernails. There's no mentions of swabbing Shanann's arms for DNA or the children's fingerprints. Chris Watts said there was no way his fingerprints would be on the children and that he's certain Shanann's would be. He says the same about DNA. However, investigators never pursue to verify this and intentionally deny the defense from being able to do so. Let me ask you, if you're going to make up a story, why make up a story that could be verified? If you're an investigator, why not go through the steps to try to disprove this story? At the end of the day, I believe there is a lack of evidence proving that Chris Watts' initial story of him taking Shanann's life after she took the children's life was false. That doesn't mean I think Shanann did anything. What it means is the investigation was not done. It was not looked into by investigators at all. That's what I believe. And I don't think it was some sort of conspiracy. I do think it may be because well-intentioned investigators fell victim to their own biases.
Yes, please.
Watts originally gave a narrative that's in the arrest affidavit. Did he ever give a different story after that?
No. The story that you all have had from the affidavit in which he falsely claimed that Shanann had responsibility for the death of the two girls was the only statement that he gave until his pleas of guilty in the courtroom.
Now, why? Why do you think Chris urgently, just all of a sudden, wanted to plead guilty? None of this stuff, I mean, just you're going to put yourself away for life. And it just seems like, to me, he was being pressured. He was being threatened. In my opinion, that is what happened. In my opinion, it goes really high, way above Nichol Kessinger.
And we all know that the justice system truly needs a lot of work.
All of us standing up here, I think, have dealt with a number of serious crimes, but when you take a look at this one and you take a look at the death of those children, and like I said this morning, the death of Shanann, none of these things had to happen. And the manner in which they were disposed of showed a complete and utter disregard for any kind of human decency at all.
That's why you should have fought, and you should have found out what really happened, no matter what. You shouldn't have accepted a plea deal in this case. And if the reason you did, the only thing I can think of is there's a cover-up. There's something bigger to this picture. I'm telling you guys, it's going to come out.
Then again, there could be some things more sinister. Those are other things that we're looking into. But if you don't buy into all of these other theories that I'm bringing to the table about, these other people that I've brought to light here, if you don't believe any of that, you don't have to. At the end of the day, you can work with what we already know, what we've known this entire time. The evidence was never looked into because, in my opinion, investigators focused on Chris. That's who they wanted for this crime. That's who they got for this crime. Occam's razor says it's Chris Watts. Let's go with Chris Watts. There's no way in hell Shanann would have done anything to her kids. Let's not even bother investigating it, because there's just no way in our minds that she could have done that. So let's just not even investigate it. And the problem with that is not that I believe Shanann Watts killed her kids, is that they could have found evidence that a female did something to those kids. The hands were small enough. They were smaller than a man's hands. You can tell the difference. And another autopsy, which the defense wanted, the defense asked, can we have another autopsy done with a medical examiner outside of the county, not working with the DA,
Was denied.
someone who wouldn't be biased to the DA's theory? And they said no. And the judge signed off on that. No. If there were going to be a trial, this wouldn't be the case. And I think that's part of why the DA pushed this plea deal so quickly, because you would think that he would want to look at this evidence so that he wouldn't need to give a plea deal. He could put that man on trial and watch him get the death penalty, but he knew that wouldn't happen. That was not going to happen. There was too much and too little to prove that Chris Watts acted alone in this case, in my opinion. And regardless, all of this other stuff would have been tested. Where would that have led? Would it have led to somebody else committing this crime alongside Chris? We don't know. And unfortunately, I believe a lot of this evidence is gone. There's I wish I had it in front of me. Along with Chris's plea deal, which, maybe I'll do a video on that so that I can read it. But along with his plea deal, at the end of it, it says Chris Watts signed off on a lot of this stuff being destroyed.
Now, answer me why that would ever be in a plea deal. Why would someone ever even put that in any kind of plea deal? I mean, if anything was to ever come up in the future, you have to have evidence to come back and look on. So we have to pray that some of this evidence was saved back. Pray that some of those investigators did what they were supposed to do, did the right thing.
Case closed. He could have saved it in case he wanted to file an appeal. But like I said, with a plea deal, you're not going to file an appeal. So he could have filed other things, and he looked into those. And I can't remember what that was called either. But anyway, we might talk about this again. Probably in the conclusion, we'll talk about the plea arrangement again, because that is what the problem was, is this plea deal. If not for this plea deal, we wouldn't be asking the same questions that we're asking today. That I firmly believe. And I have to wonder what benefit the DA got from this plea deal, because it wasn't the death penalty. They had been fighting to abolish the death penalty for a very long time, and they knew that they were going to. They knew that it was going to end up going through. It had gone through in the past, and then they brought it back, and then they abolished it, and then they brought it back again, and then they were working on abolishing it again. He would never have seen execution, and the DA had to know that. He had to. The regular everyday people knew that. So what was the gain by the plea deal if not to cover up something else? He didn't want a trial. The plea deal was to avoid a trial. Now, why would you want to avoid a trial? Well, for one, it's very expensive. For two, it can last for years and years, especially in a case like this. It brings more pain to the family, more suffering to the family, but it also brings more truth to the surface.
Truth that Shanann's parents deserve. I understand that it might have put them through more pain, but wouldn't they want the other people that are also involved in the deaths of their daughter and their granddaughters and their unborn grandson to also be given justice? I mean, would they not want that? I mean, I know if it was my family, I would definitely want that. I would have never allowed a plea arrangement. I would have wanted everything out on the table.
Truth that I don't even think Chris wanted out. And that's why I think Chris was so eager to sign a plea deal immediately, not because he was the only one involved, but because he wasn't.
Right.
He wasn't the only one involved, and he wanted to protect the other person or persons involved. That is my opinion. And that's kind of what I'm trying to see. Like, is that what went on? I don't know, but that's what we're getting at. Anyway, let's move on. I'm interested to know your opinions on this. Do you understand what I'm saying here? Like, do you agree? This is like, he was offered a plea deal before a lot of evidence was going to be sought out. So Detective Pro wanted warrants for the rest of Nichol Kessinger's data, anything she looked up, and he wanted the camera, the Vivint stuff. They had that. They seized that. That was something that they had. They had the Alexa. They had things that would have probably been able to prove what really happened. It would have been able to prove Chris's story or disprove Chris's story, or at least it would have helped. But instead of looking at that to know for sure that it was just Chris who did what he did, and then the reconstruction of the truck. Were they actually in the truck? That could have been figured out with reconstruction and checking the weight that was inside the truck that morning. They would have been able to tell. So without any of that done, how could they say it was even him, let alone just him? I mean, he could have been covering for other people. I think one of the biggest things that I struggle with creating this series is okay, if I say Chris Watts did not take the lives of his children, most people would say, okay, so then you think it was Shanann. No, I don't. I think it was Nichol Kessinger.
I feel the same way as she does. And I think about this case even when I'm in my car waiting on my kids or something. I think about it all the time. And this morning I was actually thinking, and I was sitting there almost feeling sorry for Chris. And then I had to snap out of it real quick because he is where he belongs. But there is a way bigger picture to this. And it goes really high, I believe. I just got to be able to prove it. And I think it has to do with there's a lot that I can't say right now.
And or somebody else. I don't, or that she did one and Chris did the other. I don't know. I know what I've been looking into. The evidence doesn't fit. The evidence leads somewhere else. And it's evidence that was never fully tested or looked into. And that's where I have to ask, how was there a plea deal offered before any evidence was even looked at? I think I know the reason. It's because, in my opinion, they didn't want to investigate Nichol Kessinger because they already had somewhat investigated Nichol Kessinger and they didn't like what they were finding.
Exactly.
It was deeper than just...
Right here. This is the hint. There's your hint right here. If you want to know what we are thinking, because I am thinking the same lines as she is.
Chris Watts. It was deeper than just a family annihilation case, and I know that probably sounds insensitive and horrible, but it was deeper than that. We're talking government entities involved here. This is like corruption is what it is.
At the highest level.
It is bigger than Nichol Kessinger. That's my opinion. And that's what I'm trying to kind of bring across without directly saying it necessarily, because I'm trying to wait until the conclusion video to actually say my full opinion as to what I believe happened. But sometimes I see comments in the comment section and I want to respond, but I don't necessarily want to respond in the comment section, if that makes sense. There are a lot of people watching me and, I just, to protect myself for one, to protect my investigation for two, I don't want people taking my stuff before I'm even able to present it, because I answered it in a comment below, because it does happen.
Yeah.
So anyway, let me know what you think about this video. Let me know what you think about my opinion on what I just said. I'm open to all opinions. People have the opinion that Shanann's guilty of this, and I can respect that. That's being unbiased. It doesn't mean I'm blaming her. It means that I understand that in a true investigation, these things would have been looked into and they would have likely been ruled out, because I don't believe that she took the kids' lives, but we can't rule it out. So those people that believe that theory have every right to believe it, because it's never been disproven. It's never been fully proven that Chris did this whole thing alone, right? The plea deal kept that from happening, period. So we can all argue and, you know, have our own opinions and whatever, but at the end of the day, we all just want to know what the hell happened.
Yep.
Are there people out there walking free that are responsible for children's lives being lost?
That is what matters. And that is the end of this video. I want you guys to stick around though. If you have not seen the GPS evidence where it shows her actual movements, where she goes to work every day, and then that morning how her movements were. So it's just a short, like 4-minute clip, but if you want to see it, I'm going to put it up next. So stay here. But if not, I will see you guys later. Okay, this is what I want to show you a clip of. If you guys have not seen this video, it is a very good video and informative as well. So let me know. It's got a lot of views, so some of you may have already seen it. But if you would like to see the whole video, let me know. But I just wanted to share this clip with you because it shows, finally, it shows where exactly her phone was pinging at and shows her GPS. So just watch it for a few minutes, and it's going to be a quick clip.
Into the back of his truck, including, tragically, his own family. And just after 5:45, Chris Watts leaves his driveway en route to Survey 319 with both of his children still alive in the back seat. It's now 6:16 a.m. and Nichol Kessinger makes a call to her close friend Jim. 3 days later, during Nichole's first in-office interview, Detective Kobach would ask her if she was willing to verify her whereabouts for the afternoon of the 13th of August. Nichol would acknowledge that upon arriving home that day, her friend Jim was already present at her apartment, which meant that he could confirm her arrival. However, when pressed to confirm her alibi, this is how Nichol Kessinger responded.
From an investigative point, he could be a person who could say, yeah, I was there at 3:45. He doesn't know Chris. He doesn't know anything. He could say with one phone call, yeah, she came in at 3:45. Done.
Totally.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I don't have to ask anything more than, hi, Chris, my name's Kevin. Or Jim. And I'm not saying you have to give it to you.
Just leave Jim alone.
If
Jim
at some point,
up in this.
if at some point I needed Jim's info to, let's say we couldn't find your phone records, would you tell me who Jim was?
I will give them to you.
Would you tell me who Jim was if I couldn't get him?
If you had to.
Okay.
I don't really want to
Great.
involve him in this, so it's
Perfect.
not fair to him. That's not, no, if I do not have to do that.
That's fine.
Now, you just heard her say, basically, that Chris and Jim do not know each other. That's one of these things. The other thing is the ping.
Nichole's friend Jim is just one of many rabbit holes throughout the vastness of Watts Island. But during one of Nichole's final interviews with Detective Kobach, he mentioned that she had pictures on her phone of a heavier set man who was with her at the same time she and Chris were at the sand dunes. Nichol then confirms that the picture was of her friend Jim.
Yep.
And this confirmation would mean that Chris knew exactly who Jim was. And it's Jim who Nichol called in the minutes just after Chris left his house to go to Survey 319 that morning. On its face, Nichole's call to Jim doesn't appear to be out of place. She frequently called him in the days and weeks prior. However, it's Nichole's location when she made that call that has caught the attention of everyone who has ever evaluated her phone records.
All right, let me move. Because here we go.
But there's something about this entry that even law enforcement overlooked. In the months of Nichole's prior phone records, we are able to ascertain her exact route to and from work. Thanks to these records, we can observe the roads that Nichol Kessinger used on her daily commute from her home to her job at Anadarko and back each and every day. The consistency of her route is the most important part of these records, and this is why. Because on the morning of August 13, 2018, at 6:16 a.m., for the first time in the history of Nichol Kessinger's supposed drive to work, her phone is now pinging somewhere that she has never previously been. And the tower that her phone is pinging from would place her in the same proximity of the Watts family home. the exact same address to the house that Nichol Kessinger Googled less than 36 hours earlier. The journey to the oil well site was a little over an hour away from the Watts residence. But while Chris was headed there, he would begin calling and texting his coworkers just.
Okay, that's what I wanted to show you guys for now. But if you want to see this whole video, if you have not seen it, let me know down below. But for now, this is it. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it was informative. And leave me your comments down below. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.